Trump isn't alone. These millennials, as President Trump rails against the Federal Reserve and urges it to lower interest rates, a similar push is coming from a group founded this year by three left-leaning millennials who, albeit for very different reasons. Mr. Trump regularly points out that inflation is low and says that the Fed should slash rates, which would weaken the dollar and help with his continuing trade wars. The new group, the campaign may seem oddly timed. Unemployment in the United States is at a nearly 50-year low, and there are more job openings than applicants. The Fed's key bench, but Employ America is embracing an unusual moment in the politics of central banking. Democrats have now that a Republican president is in the White House and price gains have proved surprisingly subdued, members of both parties have coalesced around a preference for low borrowing costs. The Fed itself is engaged in a year-long review of its monetary policy practices and communications, creating an opportunity to question what the central bank's goal of maximum sustainable employment means in the modern era, and, potentially, a chance to push monetary policymakers toward a more expansive definition. It's a good time to broaden the conversation, said Alexander Berger of the Open Philanthropy Project, who helped to approve a short-term, $300,000 grant for Employ America that can be increased and extended if the group gains traction. The philanthropy, Sam Bell, Employ America's founder, is an unlikely monetary policy crusader. He has a degree in, as Mr. Bell watched a slow jobs recovery unfold, he became convinced that the Fed was placing too much weight on guarding against inflation, and too little on fostering a strong and rapid labor market recovery. Employ America wants to change that. Mr. Bell, there's a wonky tribe on Twitter that we're trying to be a home for, to some extent, Mr. Bell, 35, said. I want to harness, the Fed's job is to sustain the highest level of employment that is consistent with low and stable inflation. Policymakers, after years of saying employment was at, near, or even past its sustainable level and lifting rates 9 times to avert a spike in prices that never arrived, officials are now less sure. There is no destination point for full employment, there's no one number that you could pick and say, we're there, Lael Brainerd, a member of the Fed's Board of Governors, said in a recent television interview. John C. Williams, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, has said that if the economy could achieve a 3.5% unemployment rate with stable inflation, that would be terrific news. The shift in mindset has created an opening for Employ America. In addition to Mr. Bell, who calls himself Employ America's chief tweeting officer, recently helped to derail Stephen Moore's chances of joining the Fed's Board of Governors. When news broke that Mr. Moore's past comments about women, which Mr. Bell mostly steered clear of, ultimately cost him support in the Senate. But key lawmaker, the soundtrack to our children's short lives has been Wheels on the Bus and Stephen Moore interviews, said Kate Kelly, Mr. Bell's wife. I say that with an eye for all of Mr. Bell's efforts, Mr. Moore said he had never heard of him or Employ America. He also said I've been saying for 6 months that the Fed is too tight, he said, meaning he thinks the central bank should start to cut interest rates. Employ America won't oppose every pick Mr. Trump makes for the Fed. Mr. Bell often praises Richard H. Clarida, the Fed's vice chair, who was nominated by Mr. Trump. Nor is the group, but Mr. Amarnath, 27, left his job as a hedge fund economist to help start the group because he thinks the Fed could use a push toward deeper self-reflection. Policymakers, there are always priors to challenge, said Mr. Amarnath, a Columbia graduate who studied economics. These are costly. He recently published in suggesting that the Fed should set policy with an eye toward overall labor income, rather than inflation, when the economy is shaky. Such an approach, Ms. Steens, 33, manages Employ America's operations and will help with hiring if the organization's funding is extended. If it is a little brazen for 3 people with a trial grant to try to influence a 105-year-old central bank that employs hundreds of PhD economists, at least there is some precedent. Fed up. At a time when groups on the right were calling loudly for rate increases, the Fed-up organizers landed meetings with Fed officials and drew media attention. Mr. Bell the climate in Washington is friendlier to employ America's message, but political winds and Fed leadership can change. Beyond making a case, now is the time to wage that campaign, as the Fed holds conferences, including a recent one in Chicago, to consider possible changes to its policy-setting framework. The review is the Fed is showing itself to be much more open to reconsidering its policy regime, said Peter Conti Brown, a Fed historian at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. Employ America.
Raindrop, drop top, smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.